the Rolls-Royce Ghost. So called because it sometimes seems to be haunted, with poltergeists as passengers. No. Nothing to do with being haunted or poltergeists or anything like that. Ghost is in fact the oldest name used by Rolls-Royce. Now, you obviously know Henry Royce, the engineer behind Rolls-Royce, and Charles Rolls, who is, well, he's sometimes unfairly, I think, just characterised as a salesman. But you might not have heard of Claude Johnson. He's sometimes referred to as the hyphen in Rolls-Royce because he was such an important character in those early years. Now, the first car that was actually produced under the Rolls-Royce badge was the 4050 horsepower, and Claude Johnson thought, that won't do really, so he had one painted silver and named the Silver Ghost. And that then caught on for all the subsequent cars, right up until the Phantom in 1925. So it's a very historic name, Ghost. And this is the latest Ghost. No longer is it based on a BMW 7 Series, instead it makes use of the same proprietary Rolls-Royce underpinnings as you'll find in the Cullinan and current Phantom. There is talk of post-opulence with the design, which is a rather Brian Sewell way of saying it's more subtle than the Phantom, a touch more rounded, a little less imposing, a more discreet design for perhaps more discreet customers. Personally, I think the front is still distinctive while not being overt, but the back is perhaps a little too anonymous. I do rather like the regal midnight sapphire paint of this car though, beautifully understated. Everything is relative, of course, because you can't really call something that's over 5.5 metres long and 2.15 metres wide discreet or understated. And it does feel gargantuan to drive. Not really because the steering's particularly imprecise, quite the opposite in fact, but more because the view out, it makes it so hard to place. You sit quite high up, it's almost sort of like mini SUV view out, but you've got this enormous bonnet. It's a good job the Spirit of Ecstasy is up here, otherwise you wouldn't know it end. It's like a sort of infinity pool in front of you. I've no idea what's over there, where does it all end? Squeezing it down narrow country lanes or through narrow city streets is nerve-wracking. Under that enormous bonnet is a 6 3/4 litre, not 6.75, that doesn't sound quite right, 6 3/4 litre twin turbocharged V12, putting out 563 brake horsepower and 629 pounds-foot of torque. Despite the fact this car weighs 2,490 kilos, that's enough to actually propel it from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 4.6 seconds and onto a top speed that's limited to 155 miles an hour. The 8-speed gearbox, if you put it into low, which is really the only mode choice you have in this car, does pick up surprisingly quickly and makes it responsive on the way out of corners in a way that you might not expect for a Rolls-Royce. V12 sounds pretty good as well when it wakes up. With all-wheel drive to give consummate traction and all-wheel steering that can angle the rear wheels up to 5 degrees, the Ghost actually has a surprising turn of pace down a road. It feels a bit inappropriate, like having a kickabout after work in your suit and tie and going in for a slide tackle in your Savile Row, but that doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. But driving this car quickly, that's not really what it's about. It's actually at its most enjoyable when it's soothing its way down the road. It's at a more refined pace that you can enjoy this car's most pleasing quality, its ride. This car actually has the full suite of planar technology, so it has things that even the Cullinan and Phantom 8 don't yet have. It has the flag bearer system, which harks back to the chap who used to walk in front of cars with a red flag, and that reads the road ahead thanks to cameras and then adapts the suspension and the 12-volt anti-roll system in the rear so that it will soak up the bumps that are on their way to the wheels. This also has the GPS gearbox, which ensures you're gently shuffled into the correct gear in plenty of time to cope with the severity of whatever corners lie ahead on the road. It's so good that most of the time you don't even notice there's any swapping of ratios going on, and with all that torque, you suspect that half the 8 gears would probably suffice. Then there is something that is unique to this car at the moment. This has mass dampers on the upper wishbones. They're there because there were some troubles with just the very smallest of bumps, particularly at low speed, and just ironing those out, things that the air suspension couldn't quite cope with. Anyway, an engineer came in apparently after hours and came up with the idea of the mass dampers, but essentially it's 3 kilos on top of a wishbone. Normally that would be undesirable because it's unsprung weight, but in a car of this sort of size, it doesn't matter so much. I like the fact that somebody came in after hours, and I think Henry Royce would have liked that as well, given that he designed the adjustable shock absorber on his deathbed. Literally sketched it on the back of an envelope, handed it to his nurse, who's dead the next morning. The torque that I mentioned before, 629 pounds-foot, that also helps you drive this smoothly because it arrives at just 1600 RPM, or only 600 RPM after tickover. And that means it's got an almost, well, electric delivery, I suppose. And I mean, because obviously electric cars have all their torque from 0 revs. It's one of the reasons I think actually Rolls-Royces will be suited to being full EVs in the future. All of this means that the ride is sumptuous. The word that people always use is waft, but actually Rolls-Royce describes it in a way that I rather like. They describe it as like flying on land. So I shall no longer say waft, I shall say flying on land.
Of course, the magnificent ride quality isn't really for the benefit of the person driving the car, it's for those in the back. In fact, an awful lot of the technology and toys are for the entertainment of the occupants of the rear seats. So let's have a look back there.
Power close, of course, because, well, why would you want to shut a door yourself? And this wouldn't be a Rolls-Royce review if I didn't mention the umbrellas secreted within the rear doors. You can have them matched to your car. Ha! And when you put them back in here wet, this sheath is now heated, so that next time you get it out, you have a nice dry umbrella. Anyway, the obvious traits of luxury continue in here. For a start, I've got a huge amount of legroom. The seats obviously heat and cool and pummel you with massaging functions. The headrests, pretty much better than any pillow I think I've ever laid my head on. We have the fridge in here, 2 settings, so you can have sort of normal ski resort or Arctic, presumably, a couple of champagne flutes, room for a bottle of Bollinger. And then in here we have the tray tables which fold down like this with a huge screen that comes out, and you can watch television in here or just check the navigation, things like that. We fold this away again, up into here. Nicely embossed Spirit of Ecstasy on the back of there as well. Obviously control all that from in here by your own iDrive controller, as you have in the front. The materials are obviously all very wonderful, with the sumptuous leather, the one piece here, the sort of Lalique glass behind the door handle there. And then of course there is the starlit headlining, which is fantastic, relaxing and endlessly fascinating, at least for the amount of time I've had the car. Occasionally, if you're lucky as well, you will spot a shooting star herring across like that. There's one. Oh, I forgot the carpets. They are, well, they're a little thing in a way, really, but so sumptuous. I mean, short of actually getting a sheep in here, they couldn't be more woolly if they tried. You feel like you'd lose your shoes in them. Anyway, for all that there are very obvious traits of luxury in here, it's actually the subtler things, the things that you can't see, the things that they've done behind the scenes that intrigue me even more about the Ghost.
And much of that unseen engineering is to do with achieving, as Simon and Garfunkel might say, the sound of silence.
It is so quiet in here that you can quite literally hear a pin drop, which actually louder than I expected. Who knew pins made such a racket? Rolls-Royce, when they were developing this, actually toyed with the idea of having a completely silent cabin and then decided that that was too spooky. So they engineered in the fact that this would have just a very subtle whisper, a single note. So they tuned the entire cabin to resonate at this one note. In order to achieve this near silence, they looked at things like the boot. So it was a rather cavernous 500 litres back there, and there was an occasional boom, so they put some piping in to relieve the air pressure, equalise it between there and the cabin. The seats too were creating a resonance, because obviously they're a large weight and a lot of it is up high, so they added a mass damper. Obviously we talked about those with the wishbones. Well, mass dampers appear in here too, just to take out the sound of the seats. And of course, because it's so near silent in here, it means you can hear music better when you want to play it. And the audio system is the best I have ever heard. There's no brand name, so there's no Bang & Olufsen or Bowers & Wilkins or name. It just says bespoke audio. And again, it's the technology that you can't see. There are obviously the speakers here, but these sills have been turned into giant subwoofers. And rather than just having the cone speakers, they've also used little exciter speakers, which effectively turn the entirety of this ceiling into one big speaker. The result is extraordinary. It's pointless me trying to get it over on film because we couldn't really capture it adequately. But it's like having your favourite artist sitting in the back seat with you, or being able to hear every single instrument in the orchestra, some that you probably didn't even realise existed in the tracks you've listened to for ages.
The rest of the infotainment system will be recognisable to anyone that has spent time in a BMW, but this is no bad thing, and it's somehow done slightly more subtly than when the VW group shares bits across its brands. There's obviously Apple CarPlay too. And while the technology might be familiar, it is framed by a cabin that has a level of detail and luxury that is a cut above almost anything else. From this car's open pore walnut to the metal vents, to the smooth action of their organ stop controls, to the way the 850 twinkling stars appear as if by magic on the beautifully illuminated fascia. Even simple things add to the ambience, like the fan controls being labelled with soft, medium and high, rather than just being illustrated by a bar chart or numbered.
It's like saying, I don't know, cops instead of turn 9 at Silverstone, or parabolica instead of turn 11 at Monza. It's descriptive, it oozes quality. Actually, whilst we're talking about the HVAC, if I just turn this from soft all the way up to max, and then if I pull this organ stop out here and here, normally when I do these pieces to camera, we have to turn all the air conditioning off basically, so it gets quite hot in the cars because it's much too loud. This is on max and it's barely above a whisper in here.
From the polished air conditioning ducts to the nano fleece filter that removes contaminants from the cabin's microenvironment, the Rolls-Royce Ghost ensures that its occupants exist in rarefied air. And although starting at just £250,000, this is in some ways the baby of the range, it certainly never felt like a lesser Rolls to me. Certainly not in terms of its size when I was behind the wheel, nor in terms of its serenity, level of luxury or engineering. It really is supernaturally good.